Hi and welcome to Pilates Fundamentals. This is the first class in this series, and this is perfect for if you're a complete or somewhat complete beginner to Pilates, because I'm going to be going over a few fundamentals, a few concepts that are important if you're going to continue on with Pilates. This is also great if you've been doing Pilates for a while and you need to refresh those concepts. Sometimes we just really get into autopilot mode with something that we've done for a long time. So it's good to come back to the fundamentals just to refresh those ideas. So we're going to start on our backs. So let's make our way there. So coming onto your back in whatever way makes most sense to you. And we'll just take a moment to get settled, place our feet flat on the floor, our arms at our sides for a moment. Just let your body get nice and heavy onto the mat here. And as a way to start connecting into the body, just feeling the contact points between your body and the floor. Maybe starting from the feet, coming up to the pelvis, feeling that weight of your pelvis into the floor, the contact of your hands and parts of your arms and shoulders against the ground, and then finishing with the back of the head. So as a first thing, we're going to create these triangle hands. So this is what I call triangle hands, where our index fingers and our thumbs are touching. We've created a little triangle here in the center. And we're going to take those hands onto the front of the pelvis, letting our elbows come down to the floor. So just in this relaxed position, I want you to get a sense of what position your pelvis is in this moment. What I mean by that is it tipped up a little bit? So are your fingertips a bit higher than your thumbs? Keeping in mind it can be very subtle, a subtle difference. Or maybe it's the opposite, where your pelvis is tipped, what I call down. So your thumbs are a little bit higher than your fingertips. Or perhaps it's neither and things feel quite level. So just taking a moment to maybe it helps to close down the eyes to do this, just to tune into what your, let's call it your natural position is. Once you've kind of got an idea of that, take your attention up a little bit higher into the lower back. You can keep your hands where they are. And notice the space between your lower back and the floor. So notice how much space is there. Is it quite what seems like quite a lot of space? Is it a very little space where you can only fit like a raisin in there between your lower back and the floor? So no right or wrong, just noticing what that space is like. And then what we're going to do is go over what neutral spine is, because that's a term that's used a lot in Pilates. I use it a lot in Pilates. We set that position often and then work from there. So we're going to go over what that means. So keeping the hands on the front of the pelvis, we're going to rock the pelvis forward. So that's going to increase the space between your lower back and the floor. And then we're going to slowly rock it back to center. And then we're going to rock it the other way, so back or posteriorly, where we're going to close off the space between the lower back and the floor. And we're going to slowly go back and forth between these two, tipping forward, and then coming through center and tipping back. So tipping forward, notice that the pubic bone ends up being lower than the two hip points at the front of the pelvis. And then as you come through center, everything levels out. And then as you go the other way, your pubic bone is lifted up towards the ceiling. So feel that with your hands, the tipping of the pelvis forward and back. We'll go a couple more times. Forward and back. See if you can do this without too much work from the legs. And then from here, we're going to find our neutral. So those are pelvic tilts or pelvic rocks that help us feel out how much range of motion we have and how moving the pelvis moves the lower back. And now our neutral position is where our triangle hands are nice and level. Or another way to look at it is the pelvis is nice and parallel to the floor. Or another way to look at it is the pubic bone and the two hip points, or our fingertips and our thumbs are in a level position. So see if you can locate what your neutral is. Keeping in mind it might be different from your natural position. So your natural might be tipped forward a bit or tipped back. So here we're finding our level position. In this level position, it should feel like you have to do a little bit of work to be there, to stay there. It takes some conscious efforts. There should also be a little space between the lower back and the floor, so not your biggest space that your body allows for, also not a closed off space, so a small space, about a grape-sized space, let's say. So once you've found that, that's your neutral spine. And we're going to challenge this position a little bit. We'll take the hands off the front of the pelvis and reach them up to the ceiling. Let your arms sink down a little bit into the floor without jamming them in. So we're going to take a breath in as we send the arms overhead, as far back as is comfortable. And then on the exhale, we're going to bring the arms back up. So this is going to be our movement. So inhale, arms go overhead with control. And exhale, they're going to come back up. So here what we want to watch for, other than the control in this movement, is what's happening, if anything, at the pelvis. So sometimes the tendency might be as the arms go back, our pelvis rocks forward and the arch increases in our lower back. It might be subtle, it might not be. So we've lost that neutral position. Or it might be the other way where we tuck our pelvis under and we flatten our back against the floor. That's fine if that's what we're intending to do, but here we're trying to stay in that neutral position. You might even bring one hand to the front of the pelvis. Notice if your pelvis is staying level or if it has a tendency to tip one way or the other. Breathing in as you send the arm up. Breathing out to return. Maybe switching arms. Another thing that will cue you that the pelvis is not staying level is if there's movement at the rib cage. So as we send the arm up, the weight of your arms might want to lift your rib cage up or swing it up to the ceiling, which is likely to tip your pelvis forward. So we can keep an eye on the rib cage as well as we do this exercise. So let's go back to 2 arms for a couple more reps. Notice as we try to keep the ribs down, there should be a little bit of a tug, some abdominal activation as you try to keep the ribs from popping up and the pelvis from moving. One more breath in and breath out. So it might all be very subtle, so but that's what Pilates is like, just our catching those subtle changes and making corrections as we go. So staying in our neutral position, ribs are heavy down towards the floor, both arms up. Now we're going to scissor the arms, so send the left arm down to the hip, right arm overhead. Coming back through center, switching. Right arm down, left arm up. We'll continue like this, scissoring the arms. Breathing in, breathing out. So as you get the coordination of the movement with your breath, tune into the position of your pelvis. So without your hands being there, can you tell the pelvis is staying nice and level? Is the pubic bone and the hip points, are they on the same level? Is there just a little gap between the lower back and the floor? So it's just a light awareness of there. We're not trying to stay rigid as we do. 2 more. Last one. Meeting back in the center, and we'll slowly lower our arms back down to the floor. So let your pelvis legs move a little bit here. Just gonna shake it all out. And then we're gonna come back to that neutral position. So if you need to do a couple of pelvic tilts back and forth, just to find that position again, maybe use your triangle hands. So coming to neutral. We're just going to challenge the position in a different way now with some leg movement. So this time we're going to slide the left heel down the mat. Might need to float it a little bit if there's a lot of friction there between your foot and the mat. And just pause at the bottom and check to see what's going on in the pelvis. Is it tipped to one side? Has it tipped forward where there's a large space in the lower back? Has it tipped the other way where you're really trying to hold and grip through the abdominal muscles? So just check in and then see if you can bring it to level if it's not already there. And then we're going to slide that heel back in, place the foot flat, and then try the other side. So gently sliding the right heel down the mat till the leg is straight without completely letting it relax, and then bringing it back in. So simple movement, but we're looking for a relatively simple. We're looking for that subtleness of the pelvis. So can we keep it fairly still as we send the weight of the leg forwards? You can keep your hands on the front of the pelvis if that helps you kind of tune in to those subtleties. And well, just a word of warning, we don't want to be like holding it rigid, like really contracting, like we might in a plank, for instance, just to keep everything from moving. We want to allow there to be some ease and some fluidity. So it's not kind of all or nothing, it's more of a gentler awareness. So we'll do 4 more here. So I'm just noticing maybe some tension in my shoulders. So trying to ease up through there. So last two, keeping that pelvis nice and neutral. So it requires a lot of focus, a lot of mindful awareness. We're coming back to that start position. So staying neutral. Another subtle little exercise here. So remember, this is how we build from here. So it becomes less subtle in terms of the movements that we add on over time, but the fundamentals are exactly like this. So really paying attention and tuning in. So this time you're going to imagine your pelvis is a clock face. So let's say the pubic bone is 12 o'clock. Your right side of the pelvis is 3 o'clock, your belly button is 6, and then we've got 9 on the left. So we're going to bring our attention to the 3 and the 9, so the left and right sides of the pelvis. And we're going to see if we can tip the pelvis towards the 3 o'clock. You're not going to really be able to see this probably on the screen, but what's happened as I've tipped the pelvis to the right is the left side of my pelvis has tipped up, right side of the pelvis is tipped down. So no longer level but skewed to the right. Then I'm going to bring everything back to center. Then I'm going to tip over to the 9 o'clock. So the 3 o'clock is going to tip up. Then I'm going to bring everything back to center. So I want you just to play around with that tipping from left to right, or from 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock, coming through center each time. So awareness of where that center is before you tip to the other side. So it's a rather small movement. And we're going to try to keep the legs out of it as much as we can. So I'll be quiet for a moment so you can just really tune in. What we want to watch for here, there's always something to watch for, is that we're not hiking one hip up, so we're not bringing this one side of the pelvis up towards our ribs. We're keeping this length on the sides and just finding a little tip back to center and then the other side. So let's try a few more. For me, it's easier to tip one way than the other. It could be just that my pelvis is starting already in a bit of a rotation. So that might also be the case for you. Nothing to worry about there. It's just how it is in your body. We'll go one more to each side. And we'll bring it back to center. Hands at our sides. We're going to take it into a little bit of a bigger movement here to finish. So we're in our neutral. There's that little space between the lower back and the floor. We're going to take a breath in. As you exhale, you're going to tip your pelvis towards you. So this is called imprint. I don't think I've said that yet. So when the pelvis is tipped up or the pubic bone is lifted up, the lower back is on the floor. This is called your imprint, as you can probably understand why. The lower back being kind of imprinted into the floor, but not to the, I don't love the term because it makes it seem like you have to really press your back into the floor, and I prefer to go more on the subtle end. So it's definitely against the floor, but we're not trying to create a dent in the ground. From here, we're going to start to lift the pelvis. Lift one vertebrae at a time through the lower back. And then we're gonna come through the mid-back. We're gonna keep lifting one vertebrae at a time till we come onto the shoulders. And our hips are in a straight line with our knees and our shoulders. So we're here at the top in this bridge position. We're going to come down the way we came, except in reverse. So connect to your upper back between the shoulder blades. You're going to lower, you're going to soften through the chest, lower your vertebrae one at a time down onto the mat. There's going to be a little bit of a scoop in your pelvis here in order to allow the lower back to come down one vertebrae at a time. And we're going to find that neutral position again. So this one takes time to figure out, so not to worry. We're going to start again, breathing in at the bottom. Slowly tip into that imprint. So pelvis tipped up, lower back against the floor. And then we lift the pelvis, we lift to the vertebrae. Each vertebrae above presses into the floor and then lifts off, and we're ending up on the shoulders. Here we might want to shift our weight a little bit towards our feet so we're not all on the head and neck. It's going to activate your legs a little bit more. Just taking in this position here, the sensations that are present for you. And then we're going to melt it back down from the top. So between the shoulder blades, we allow the vertebrae to lay down one at a time. And keep a little bit of a tuck of the pelvis here as we come down through the lower back and back to neutral. You might notice that it's a little chunky, let's say, so it comes down, your back comes down in chunks. It's really normal at the start. It might take a lot of time for that to become more like one vertebrae at a time versus in chunks. Let's do this one more time. So breath in at the bottom, breath out as we tilt the pelvis towards us. And we slowly roll up. Again, at the top, if you feel like you're really on the neck and shoulders, shift your weight towards. So pull you're pulling your bum towards your heels. Feel the activation here in the backs of the legs. Notice that there shouldn't be a big arch in the lower back, so it's not a yoga bridge. We're fairly neutral through the spine. Our hips, you can hopefully see it depends on the body of course, but you see our hips when we look down. And we're going to melt it back down, so starting from the shoulder blades, one vertebrae at a time becomes heavy into the floor. And we come back to neutral. And there we go. So from here, we're going to just shift our hips to one side, rock onto one side, taking our time, pressing ourselves up, back to where we started. So that's the end of the first class of Pilates fundamentals. I hope you enjoyed it. I recognize it can be frustrating at times if this is completely new to you, so give yourself some time to get used to some of these words and how this feels in your body. And I know with practice it'll get easier and more intuitive. So, so I hope you enjoyed this first class. Come back to it often if you're starting off. Maybe do it a few times before moving on to the next one, just so you can really understand the concepts and really feel them in your body before adding more and perhaps confusing yourself a little bit. So I hope to see you at another class again soon.